You decided that maybe you want to see a counselor. So where do you start? Start with your insurance. Therapy isn't cheap, so you want to have a way to pay for it. So you call your insurance and you see how many sessions they cover initially. Don't worry if they only say 6, because that just means they're going to cover 6 of a specific issue. Now, as therapists, we can make sure that we have multiple issues that we can work on that we can bill separately for. So 6 sessions usually means 6 sessions for one issue. Now, all insurances are different. They might pay 8 sessions, they might pay 12 sessions. Again, it's not limited to that number. It just means that's what they'll pay for up front, without needing me as a therapist to go in and just add in a different issue that we're working on. Also, when you've got them on the phone, ask them what your copay will be, because that's going to really determine how often you can come based on your budget. So if your copay is $20, then you can plan, all right, I need $80 this month to set aside for counseling. After you've covered insurance, you're going to check and see what type of therapist you really want to go to. So maybe you need an addiction specialist. Maybe you need like a child divorce, custody issue kind of a specialist. Maybe you need sexual trauma specialist. Now again, all therapists have lots of different competencies. So just because your therapist doesn't list something in their top 2 doesn't mean that they can't do that well. So don't rule out a therapist for those reasons, but if you're really looking for something specific, you can search for that. So decide what you need and what you would like to have in a therapist before you go searching for the types that you want, because it's going to give you a little bit more direction. Now, there's multiple ways that you can find a therapist. You can Google them. Some people have, private agencies, private practices, community mental health centers. All those are going to be listed on Google. Maybe you find them through a Facebook referral group or a Facebook page or something like that. Or maybe you even know somebody who's gone and had a really good experience. Their word of mouth is just as valuable as anything on Google. Pro tip, don't go by Google reviews, because people often don't leave reviews when they're really happy and satisfied with their services, but they will frequently leave one if they're really not happy. This doesn't always give a very accurate representation of the agency itself, so don't go off Google reviews. Once you've narrowed it down to a few options, a few names that you've looked up, give them a call. See if they're accepting new patients. See if they're accepting your insurance. And then ask them what the process is from there. Kind of get a feel for what they do on the phone. But again, a lot of these places might have a receptionist, so you're not going to probably get to talk to the therapist directly unless they're a private practice or an individual practice. Once you've made your first appointment, expect paperwork. You're going to have your clinical intake paperwork, which is just like when you go to the doctor and they want to know all your background information and stuff like that. In addition to that, you might be asked to sign a release of information. This is because therapy is completely confidential, which means we don't reveal anything you say to us. We don't even tell people that you're in services with us. That's how much we protect your privacy and confidentiality. So you have to sign a complete release of information for us to be able to communicate with anybody, including a spouse or a doctor or another therapist that maybe you've seen before. So you have to sign a release of information for us to even communicate with them in any capacity, and you determine what that capacity is. Now, during the actual therapy session, you're probably going to do more assessment-like material where the therapist is going to ask you direct questions about your upbringing, your childhood, any trauma experiences, your substance use history, how old you were when you started drugs or drinking or whatever, smoking. They're going to ask about your living situation, just all of the things that really pertain to you and your life. They're going to need to know. And this is because we have to diagnose you correctly in order to treat you the most effectively. If we don't know facts about you, it makes it really hard for us to really know how to address your problems and situations. So don't be afraid. I know it takes a lot of courage to talk about the things in the first session that are uncomfortable, but sometimes this is really important for us to get a full picture of who you are. However, many private practices or individual therapists that aren't with an agency and aren't required to do that type of assessment, they might not do that in their first session with you. They might just sit down and say, hey, what brings you into therapy right now? And that's your opportunity to just start wherever you want and say whatever you want and go from there. So once your first session ends, you're probably gonna have a pretty good feeling of whether you liked the experience or not, and if you liked your therapist or not. Now, if you didn't like your therapist, that's okay. But if you walk out of the session being like, nope, that's a big no, just give yourself a moment to really identify, was it the experience of talking about really hard issues for the first time, Or was it really the therapist giving you like the bad vibes that you're not comfortable with? Because if it's, just the discomfort with the therapy, those are things that you can really work through. And it's a good indicator for you that, hey, this might be a really challenging process, but maybe this means that there's a lot more there than I thought there would be that's bothering me. Either one is okay, because you can get a different therapist, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if it was just the talking that made you uncomfortable, start there. Recognize that it might be a challenge, but give yourself some grace, and recognize that it takes a ton of courage to walk into a therapist office. So you're already a step ahead of a lot of people. Start small, don't give up, talk about what you're comfortable talking about in the beginning. It's worth it. So that's how to go about finding a therapist and what that looks like from a logistical perspective. If you have any questions, send them my way, and join me next week on This Full Life with Kevin.